The Battle of Monte Cassino was a costly series of 4 assaults by the Allies against the Winter Line in Italy held by Axis forces during the Italian campaign of World War II. The intention was a breakthrough to Rome. At the beginning of 1944, the western half of the Winter Line was being anchored by Germans holding the Rapido Gari, Lira, and Garigliano valleys and some of the surrounding peaks and ridges. Together, these features formed the Gustav Line. Monte Cassino, a historic hilltop abbey founded in AD 529 by Benedict of Nursia, dominated the nearby town of Cassino and the entrances to the Lira and Rapido valleys. Lying in a protected historic zone, it had been left unoccupied by the Germans. They had, however, manned some positions set into the steep slopes below the abbey's walls. Repeated pinpoint artillery attacks on Allied assault troops caused their leaders to conclude the abbey was being used by the Germans as an observation post. At the least, fears escalated along with casualties, and in spite of a lack of clear evidence, it was marked for destruction. On the 15th of February, American bombers dropped 1,400 tons of high explosives, creating widespread damage. The raid failed to achieve its objective, as German paratroopers occupied the rubble and established excellent defensive positions amid the ruins. Between the 17th of January and the 18th of May, Monte Cassino and the Gustav defenses were assaulted 4 times by Allied troops, the last involving 20 divisions attacking along a 20-mile front. The German defenders were finally driven from their positions, but at a high cost. Background: the Allied landings in Italy in September 1943 by 2 Allied armies commanded by General Sir Harold Alexander, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied armies in Italy, were followed by an advance northward on 2 fronts, one on each side of the central mountain range forming the spine of Italy. On the Western Front, U.S. Fifth Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark, moved from the main base of Naples up the Italian Boot, and in the east General Sir Bernard Montgomery's British Eighth Army advanced up the Adriatic coast. Fifth Army made slow progress in the face of difficult terrain, wet weather and skillful German defences. The Germans were fighting from a series of prepared positions in a manner designed to inflict maximum damage, then pulling back while buying time for the construction of the Winter Line defensive positions south of Rome. The original estimates that Rome would fall by October 1943 proved far too optimistic. Although in the east the German defensive line had been breached on the Eighth Army's Adriatic front and Ortona was captured, the advance had ground to a halt with the onset of winter blizzards at the end of December, making close air-supported movement in the jagged terrain impossible. The route to Rome from the east using Route 5 was thus excluded as a viable option, leaving the routes from Naples to Rome, Highways 6 and 7, as the only possibilities. Highway 7 followed along the west coast but south of Rome ran into the Pontine marshes, which the Germans had flooded. Highway 6 ran through the Lira Valley, dominated at its south entrance by the rugged mass of Monte Cassino above the town of Cassino. Excellent observation from the peaks of several hills allowed the German defenders to detect Allied movement and direct highly accurate artillery fire, preventing any northward advance. Running across the Allied line was the fast-flowing Rapido River, which rose in the central Apennine Mountains, flowed through Cassino and across the entrance to the Lira Valley. There the Lira River joined the Gari to form the Garigliano River, which continued onto the sea. With its heavily fortified mountain defences, difficult river crossings, and valley head flooded by the Germans, Cassino formed a linchpin of the Gustav Line, the most formidable line of the defensive positions making up the Winter Line. In spite of its potential excellence as an observation post, because of the 14th-century-old Benedictine Abbey's historical significance, the German commander-in-chief in Italy, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, ordered German units not to include it in their defensive positions. and informed the Vatican and the Allies accordingly in December 1943. Nevertheless, some Allied reconnaissance aircraft maintained they observed German troops inside the monastery. While this remains unconfirmed, it is clear that once the monastery was destroyed it was occupied by the Germans and proved better cover for their emplacements and troops than an intact structure would have offered. First battle. Plans and preparation. The plan of the U.S. Fifth Army Commander, Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark, was for British 10th Corps, on the left of a 30-kilometre front, to attack on January 17, 1944, across the Garigliano near the coast. British 46th Infantry Division was to attack on the night of January 19 across the Garigliano below its junction with the Liver in support of the main attack by U.S. 2nd Corps on their right. The main central thrust by U.S. 2nd Corps would commence on January 20 with U.S. 36th Infantry Division making an assault across the swollen Gary River 5 miles downstream of Cassino. Simultaneously, the French Expeditionary Corps, under General Alphonse Juin, would continue its right hook move towards Monte Cassino, the hinge to the Gustav and Hitler defensive lines. In truth, Clark did not believe there was much chance of an early breakthrough, but he felt that the attacks would draw German reserves away from the Rome area in time for the attack on Anzio, where U.S. 6th Corps was due to make an amphibious landing on January 22. It was hoped that the Anzio landing, with the benefit of surprise and a rapid move inland to the Alban Hills, which command both routes 6 and 7, would so threaten the Gustav defenders' rear and supply lines that it might just unsettle the German commanders and cause them to withdraw from the Gustav line to positions north of Rome. Whilst this would have been consistent with the German tactics of the previous 3 months, Allied intelligence had not understood that the strategy of fighting retreat had been for the sole purpose of providing time to prepare the Gustav line where the Germans intended to stand firm. The intelligence assessment of Allied prospects was therefore over-optimistic. The Fifth Army had only reached the Gustav line on January 15. Having taken 6 weeks of heavy fighting to advance the last 7 miles through the Bernhardt Line positions, during which time they had sustained 16,000 casualties. They hardly had time to prepare the new assault, let alone take the rest and reorganization they really needed after 3 months of attritional fighting north from Naples. However, because the Allied Chiefs of Staff would only make landing craft available until early February, the Anzio landing had to take place in late January with the coordinated attack on the Gustav line some 3 days earlier. First assault. 10th Corps on the left. The 17th of January. The first assault was made on January 17. Near the coast, British 10th Corps forced a crossing of the Garigliano, causing General von Senger, commander of German 14th Panzer Corps and responsible for the Gustav defences on the southwestern half of the line, some serious concern as to the ability of the German 94th Infantry Division to hold the line. Responding to Senger's concerns, Kesselring ordered the 29th and 90th Panzer Grenadier Divisions from the Rome area to provide reinforcement. There is some speculation as to what might have been if 10th Corps had had the reserves available to exploit their success and make a decisive breakthrough. The Corps did not have the extra men, but there would certainly have been time to alter the overall battle plan and cancel or modify the central attack by U.S. 2nd Corps to make men available to force the issue in the south before the German reinforcements were able to get into position. As it happened, 5th Army HQ failed to appreciate the frailty of the German position, and the plan was unchanged. The 2 divisions from Rome arrived by January 21 and stabilized the German position in the south. In one respect, however, the plan was working in that Kesselring's reserves had been drawn south. The 3 divisions of 10th Corps sustained 4,000 casualties during the period of the first battle. Main attack. 2nd Corps in the center. The 20th of January. The central thrust by U.S. 36th Division commenced 3 hours after sunset on January 20. The lack of time to prepare meant that the approach to the river was still hazardous due to uncleared mines and booby traps, and the highly technical business of an opposed river crossing lacked the necessary planning and rehearsal. Although a battalion of the 143rd Regiment was able to get across the Garry on the south side of San Angelo and 2 companies of the 141st Regiment on the north side, they were isolated for most of the time, and at no time was Allied armor able to get across the river, leaving them highly vulnerable to counter-attacking tanks and self-propelled guns of General Eberhard Roth's 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. The southern group was forced back across the river by mid-morning of January 21. Maj. Gen. Jeffrey Keyes, commanding 2nd Corps, pressed Major General Fred L. Walker of 36th Division to renew the attack immediately. Once again the 2 regiments attacked, but with no more success against the well-dug-in 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. 143rd Regiment got the equivalent of 2 battalions across, but once again there was no armoured support, and they were devastated when daylight came the next day. The 141st Regiment also crossed in 2 battalion strength, and despite the lack of armoured support managed to advance 1 kilometre. However, with the coming of daylight, they too were cut down, and by the evening of January 22 the regiment had virtually ceased to exist. Only 40 men made it back to the Allied lines. Rick Atkinson described the intense German resistance. Artillery and Nebula for drumfire methodically searched both bridgeheads, while machine guns opened on every sound. GIs inched forward, feeling for tripwires and listening to German gun crews reload. To stand or even to kneel was to die. On average, soldiers wounded on the Rapido received definitive treatment 9 hours and 41 minutes after they were hit. A medical study later found the assault had been a costly failure, with 36th Division losing 2,100 men killed, wounded and missing in 48 hours. 2nd Corps try north of Cassino. The 24th of January the next attack was launched on January 24. The U.S. 2nd Corps, with 34th Infantry Division under Major General Charles W. Ryder spearheading the attack and French colonial troops on its right flank, launched an assault across the flooded Rapido Valley north of Cassino and into the mountains behind, with the intention of then wheeling to the left and attacking Monte Cassino from high ground. Whilst the task of crossing the river would be easier in that the Rapido upstream of Cassino was fordable, the flooding made movement on the approaches each side very difficult. In particular, armor could only move on paths laid with steel matting, and it took 8 days of bloody fighting across the waterlogged ground for 34th Division to push back General Franek's 44th Infantry Division to establish a foothold in the mountains. French Corps halted on the right flank. On the right, the Moroccan French troops made good initial progress against the German 5th Mountain Division, commanded by General Julius Ringel, gaining positions on the slopes of their key objective, Monte Cifolca. Forward units of the 3rd Algerian Division had also bypassed Monte Cifolca to capture Monte Belvedere and Col Abate. General Juin was convinced that Cassino could be bypassed and the German defences unhinged by this northerly route, but his request for reserves to maintain the momentum of his advance was refused, and the one available reserve regiment was sent to reinforce 34th Division. By January 31, the French had ground to a halt with Monte Cifolca, which had a clear view of the French and U.S. flanks and supply lines, still in German hands. The 2 Moroccan-French divisions sustained 2,500 casualties in their struggles around Monte Belvedere. 2nd Corps in the mountains north of Cassino, it became U.S. 34th Division's task to fight southward along the linked hilltops towards the intersecting ridge on the south end of which was Monastery Hill. They could then break through down into the Lira Valley behind the Gustav line defenses. It was very tough going. The mountains were rocky, strewn with boulders and cut by ravines and gullies. Digging foxholes on the rocky ground was out of the question, and each feature was exposed to fire from surrounding high points. The ravines were no better since the gorse growing there, far from giving cover, had been sown with mines, booby traps and hidden barbed wire by the defenders. The Germans had had 3 months to prepare their defensive positions using dynamite and to stockpile ammunition and stores. There was no natural shelter, and the weather was wet and freezing cold. By early February, American infantry had captured a strategic point near the hamlet of San Onofre out less than a mile from the abbey, and by February 7 the battalion had reached Point 445, a round top hill immediately below the monastery and no more than 400 yards away. An American squad managed a reconnaissance right up against the cliff-like abbey walls, with the monks observing German and American patrols exchanging fire. However, attempts to take Monte Cassino were broken by overwhelming machine gun fire from the slopes below the monastery. Despite their fierce fighting, the 34th Division never managed to take the final redoubts on Hill 593, held by the 3rd Battalion of the German 2nd Parachute Regiment, the dominating point of the ridge to the monastery. Aftermath on February 11, after a final unsuccessful 3-day assault on Monastery Hill and Cassino Town, the Americans were withdrawn. U.S. 2nd Corps, after 2.5 weeks of torrid battle, was fought out. The performance of 34th Division in the mountains is considered to rank as one of the finest feats of arms carried out by any soldiers during the war. In return, they sustained losses of about 80% in the infantry battalions, some 2,200 casualties. At the height of the battle in the first days of February, General von Senger and Dettelin had moved 90th Division from the Garigliano front to north of Cassino and had been so alarmed at the rate of attrition. He had mustered all the weight of my authority to request that the Battle of Cassino should be broken off and that we should occupy a quite new line, a position, in fact, north of the Anzio bridgehead. Kesselring refused the request. At the crucial moment, von Senger was able to throw in the 71st Infantry Division whilst leaving 15th Panzer Grenadiers in place. During the battle there had been occasions when, with more astute use of reserves, promising positions might have been turned into decisive moves. Some historians suggest this failure to capitalize on initial success could be put down to Clark's lack of experience. However, it is more likely that he just had too much to do, being responsible for both the Cassino and Anzio offensives. This view is supported by Major General Truscott's inability, as related below, to get hold of him for discussions at a vital juncture of the Anzio breakout at the time of the Fourth Cassino battle. Whilst General Sir Harold Alexander, commanding the Allied armies in Italy, chose to have Cassino and Anzio under a single army commander and splitting the Gustav line front between U.S. 5th Army and British 8th Army, Kesselring chose to create a separate 14th Army under General Eberhard von Mackensen to fight at Anzio whilst leaving the Gustav line in the sole hands of General Heinrich von Viertinghoff's 10th Army. The withdrawn American units were replaced by the New Zealand Corps from the British 8th Army on the Adriatic front. The New Zealand Corps was commanded by Lt. Gen. Bernard Freyberg.